Branko, Terzic, I'd like to begin with the new administration, and then we'll work to FERC, and then some of the specific hot topics at the commission. President Biden has made it clear his administration will focus on climate change and the energy transition, and he's already issued a series of executive orders, including one that describes a government-wide approach to the climate crisis, including a goal of doubling offshore wind by 2030, pausing new oil and natural gas leases on public lands or in offshore waters, eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, and a clean and zero emission vehicles for federal, state, and local government fleets. What do you see as the biggest challenges and political realities that Biden faces in pursuing his clean energy agenda?
Yes, thank you very much. Clearly, the Biden administration has hit the ground running with respect to a climate change agenda, and it will occur across all of their cabinet departments. A number of observers here in Washington have remarked on the intensity in which the Biden administration has moving ahead. For example, appointing John Kerry as the climate envoy at the cabinet level. He will be leading the Paris Agreement talks. He even has a seat on the National Security Council, tying together climate change along with national security and other issues. The areas of contention, of course, will be moving ahead with the whole green energy and greenhouse gas emissions programs, increases in considerations in the social cost of carbon. On the oil and gas side, we've already seen move to stop permitting on federal lands. Clearly, there'll be more stringent regulations invoked with respect to existing water and air regulations. There'll be a revoking of an executive order on transboundary developments moving ahead. You mentioned the executive orders, extensive use of those, rolling back much of the Trump decisions. In the first 2 weeks, the president issued 30 executive orders. In the Trump administration, at the same period, it was 8, Obama 9, and Bush was 3. So clearly that's a tool that's being used. We will have an introduction all across of issues of environmental justice into decision making, where every one of the agencies will be looking at community impact reports on troubled communities, including all of the energy related agencies, FERC and others. Talking about the FERC, the president has put his own chairman in. He has to wait till July 1st to get a 3-person Democrat majority, at which time the FERC will be looking at the wholesale market design again, seriously looking at carbon pricing and capacity markets, putting them more in tune with state decisions is one option. They'll be looking at pipeline certification, which will also include environmental justice and downstream greenhouse gas emissions, which will open up a whole new area of discussion and controversy, as well as probably litigation. And we'll throw in cybersecurity considerations, continuing with the Trump administration's ban on certain foreign manufacturers of controls and equipment for the bulk power industry. This could cause complications to the industry if it's very tightly considered. So the entire economy, not just the energy sector, will see the Biden environmental clean energy program.
Perfect. Phil, would you like to add to that?
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you for inviting EEI to speak on this panel as well. Branko covered a lot of the overall areas, but if I was to specifically talk about FERC, my sense is that the agenda changed in the last 10 days, despite the fact that the resilience docket was closed out from the earlier era. Regardless of what they do, it's going to be on their plate again, similar to other times when major disruptions then change the course of the regulators and how they're viewing things and how they're going to address them. I believe that the chairman of FERC specifically, Rich Glick, as Branko mentioned, will be focusing on wholesale markets. He's made it clear that he thinks the state preferred resources should be part of markets without being limited through the Moeller type of practices. Again, pipelines, natural gas are going to be viewed somewhat more thoroughly or perhaps skeptically. I know that the administration, and you've been hearing it over the last, I'd say, 5 to 6 weeks, more and more voices really pointing out the need for extra transmission in order to undertake what the Biden administration wants on climate goals. And as those of us who've been involved in transmission know, it's extremely difficult. There's going to have to be an effort made not only on permitting and siting, there's always the issues related to the contentiousness of cost allocation. And we, of course, are most interested in what the Commission does related to return on equity and transmission policy, transmission incentives, that is, because that is in the federal law from the 2005 Act. Queue reform, with the interconnection queues so long in so many places, is also going to be something that ties in to the Biden administration agenda and the need to get transmission built to fully realize that agenda.
Thank you. Terrific. Travis, your thoughts?
Sure. Let me pick up on something that neither of the panelists have mentioned, which is the possibility of congressional action. And they probably haven't mentioned it because it is unlikely to happen in any big and sweeping way. Every time there's a political transition, there seems to be big new ideas that get pitched to Congress about really sort of epochal changes that might occur in the Federal Power Act and elsewhere. But it's hard to see how that really easily fits into the political dynamic. So instead, what you've heard from the other panelists, and I think they're absolutely correct, is that there's a lot of different regulatory activities that are within the realm of the possible that either open up lands and permitting process to the siting of sort of preferred resources or close off things like public land to the siting of disfavored resources. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. I think for the Environmental Protection Agency, you're going to see a return of targeted and forceful regulations on the fossil power sector. That these are long processes, the environmental rulemakings that have to be undertaken by EPA, and they're starting from scratch on at least one notable one with carbon emissions from the coal-fired power sector. But I would imagine they've got a lot of things sitting on the shelves waiting to be taken down there. So I guess I'd sort of leave it by saying that it oftentimes it's not easy for the federal government to necessarily induce people to spend a lot of money in the power sector and to a lesser degree the gas sector, but they can definitely make those investments more profitable or not happen at all. 2/3 of the sector is still fundamentally moored to state level regulation. But I think you should consider the federal government as either a willing partner or a potential roadblock to a lot of investments that would come up through that process.
Terrific. Travis, for Phil and Branko, Travis brought EPA into this conversation. Let's focus on that for just a minute. It appears with respect to at least the power plant emissions that the Clean Power Plan and the Affordable Clean Energy Rule are no longer in the picture, and that EPA may be going back to the drawing board with respect to power plant emissions after the DC Circuit's decision last week that cost them. FERC could very well become one of the busiest agencies in Washington in the coming months. Any other thoughts on EPA's coming agenda and what it could mean, particularly for capital investment in the generation sector?
Well, I'll begin the answers on that, Jim. I believe that, when they were pursuing Clean Power Plan before and the targets that were mentioned for 2030 for our sector, of course, that didn't become law. I think we all know that. But we already exceeded as an industry, electric companies, the 2030 targets last year. So the good news is that we're on a trajectory that's definitely cleaner. And we've made industry-wide commitments to further that. The challenge, I think, will be the fact that our industry still needs to use natural gas. The fact is that it is so flexible, not only in terms of, if needed, baseload, but obviously the ramping capacity that that helps facilitate greater penetration of renewable resources. So to that extent, if the EPA can recognize that gas is going to be a necessary part of the energy mix for the foreseeable future, although in decline, it will still be necessary, that will make for some reasoned decision making. If they feel as if gas has to be eliminated, it's going to be a completely different discussion because reliability and affordability still remain pillars of this industry in terms of moving forward with a cleaner grid.
Branko, anything to add?
Yeah, let me add to that. With respect to natural gas, we have a significant difference between what Europe is doing and what the US is doing. The European Union has decided that hydrogen would replace natural gas in the future so that the natural gas infrastructure can stay in place, be improved if it needs to, but hydrogen, a clean fuel, would flow through it. In this country, we don't have that policy. And so we've got pockets in the country which are talking about writing off stranding investment in natural gas, which I don't think is a very good thing. So if Europe can move ahead technically with hydrogen, we ought to be looking at the same thing.
Thank you.